On occasion, I've enjoyed the channel Circletoons. They often make funny animations about video games or writing cliches, and sometimes they try to do a critique of something. About a week ago, they released a video about Scadutree Fragments in Shadow of the Erdtree, and it was pretty painful. Lots of bad arguments, weird jokes, vacuous comments, and we're gonna go over some of them. But full disclosure before we get into the video, I really do not like Shadow of the Erdtree. This would become apparent throughout the video, but I thought it would be worthwhile to front-load that. Circletoons' video has a lot to do with difficulty, and while my problems with the DLC go far beyond that, it is often at the forefront of discussion when it comes to Souls-like games. That is to say, this has been a hot topic for years, and Circletoons does a very poor job of contributing to this discussion. Let us begin.
I just had a horrible dream. A dream where people bought a DLC to a difficult game made by a company that famously makes their DLCs extra difficult and then ignored a new system that makes it less difficult and got upset that the game was too difficult.
Okay, well a citation for that would be pretty nice. Personally, I was at level 14 Scadutree when fighting Commander Gaius, and I was still losing between 500 to 1000 HP with each attack. I was nearly 3/4 of the way to max Scadutree. I certainly didn't ignore the system that made the game easier, and I was still losing up to half my health bar every time this crippled bastard decided to spam his charge attack, which he can do even at 5 feet away. It's also important to note that at level 14 Scadutree there are nearly 2 levels locked behind this guy, which, going by the Fextra Life table Circletoons will show later, doesn't give me much in terms of reduction anyway.
Thank God it was just a dream, though. I'm still the Elden Lord, and this chair still has no back support. Wait, it wasn't a dream?
No, you still made that up as far as we can tell. Most of what I've come across on that subject has to do with how Scadutree Fragments are a poorly implemented system. It's not that people ignore them, but we are at the start of the video. I'm sure the references are coming.
So, some time has passed since the release of Soaked, mostly because I've actually been playing it, enjoying it, and really wanted to fully complete every aspect of the DLC before I gave a knee-jerk reaction and opinion.
Well, that's reasonable. Although I think there can be some value in a knee-jerk reaction. You only get to have a first impression once. I don't know if he has a gaming stream or anything, but I would be minorly interested to see his initial reactions to certain things.
And I'm glad to announce I've successfully beaten the final boss of the DLC, and it totally didn't have a lasting psychological effect on me.
Yeah, Radahn was a pretty shitty boss.
When I play FromSoft games, I completely close my eyes and ears to every single piece of information possible. I didn't even watch the trailers or look at sneak peek images. When the DLC was announced, I muted every single word and phrase possible so I wouldn't even see enemy designs or new environments.
I'm not sure at all what this has to do with the Scadutree Fragments. I mean, I guess if you're only planning on making the one video and you really want to put your build up to release experience in there, I guess. Personally, I just watched the trailer and it affected virtually none of my experience. I guess at the very least you could say that it got me hyped for garbage, but we'll move on for now.
I didn't mute the word Roddy, though, because I could never silence my queen.
Okay. Actually, this kind of makes me wonder why none of the base game characters have anything to say about the Land of Shadow. You get nothing from Melania, Ronnie, Ofnir the All-Knowing, who never saw the smackdown coming. It would have been nice to get some of the base game characters' perspective, a little bit.
Everything, down to the last freak, I wanted to discover and see on my own during my first playthrough. I care about how lighting cracks through a cave ceiling just as much as I care about a mainline boss fight.
No, you don't. I don't believe that for a second. And you have to understand, this is me giving him more credit than he gives himself. I don't believe he's that retarded. Of course a boss is vastly more significant than a light shaft, and you should obviously care more about that.
Every inch and second of Elden Ring is special to me, and I expected the DLC to sweep me off my feet like the base game did.
Every inch, really? Every last copy-pasted section of Crypt? Every last glob of Rot Lake? Let's not be that hyperbolic, okay? Elden Ring has many issues, and I'm sure if he was pressed, he would find at least 1 inch that wasn't special, if not downright bad.
And oh Christ, I think this is some of FromSoft's best work ever.
So you say something like that and I really start to question how well you know FromSoft's work. Virtually every part of this DLC, if not all of it, was done better in previous iterations. Encounter design, boss design, should I even bother to mention the story? The two best things this DLC has going for it are item variety and visuals. I've barely been able to experiment with all the many new options they have for weapons and spells, but I found the visuals to be pretty substanceless, especially compared to the likes of Ash Lake and Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. Although I quite like Shaman Village.
Oh, you can imagine my shock when I emerged from my grotesque gamer juice-laden flesh cocoon.
Why would you denigrate gamers like that? I mean, he says it like we all have one, but whatever, it's a joke, move on.
See?
This DLC is too hard! This is the easiest thing ever created!
What the fuck is a Scadu fragment?
What?
I assume he's saying that he checked the internet after having beaten the game, in which case I have to ask, what did you expect? People on the internet are going to shout about all kinds of things, especially when it relates to popular media that released semi-recently. People are going to have opinions, crazy or otherwise, and they often don't elucidate very well. That is to say that their perspectives are not always clear. You usually have to press them for more information if you want to understand their full opinion. Or you could just say that they ignored an important gameplay mechanic.
How did this happen? Aren't we the get good guys? Aren't we the ones that played Demon Souls?
So personally, I find the term get good to be pretty worthless. It's fun to throw it at games journalists, even though they tend to suck at every game. But there are many worthwhile criticisms of the bosses and encounters in Souls games, and this DLC is far from the exception. Also, I think it's important to understand that Elden Ring is very far removed from Demon Souls at this point. I would venture that most Elden Ring players have never touched Demon Souls, which might change if Sony would just put it on PC. The point is that Elden Ring has a much larger audience than Demon Souls ever did, so it shouldn't be a surprise that the conversation is that much louder.
You know, the game that had a feature where it removed half of your fucking health bar if you made the mistake of dying to a hidden corner shadow medieval crack addict?
Why yes, that mechanic was dog shit. So for those who don't know, Demon Souls had a mechanic called World Tendency. Certain actions would raise or lower it, and the lower it was, the harder it would be to defeat enemies, while also giving you better rewards. It would also lower if you died in human form, and if you were not in human form, you would only have half your health. Part of the problem is that this system is very poorly explained in-game, and you can make it much harder for yourself without realizing it. It would also lock you out of areas and encounters, which was kind of frustrating when raising the World Tendency was not as simple as lowering it. I never activated human form if I could help it for this reason, because what's the point of having full health all the time if enemies are just going to take more of it anyway? I think Dark Souls does this slightly better by just having a ring that makes the game harder, but that has its own problems, and hey, we're talking about Elden Ring shitty DLC right now.
Okay, easy does it. Oh, cool! Great! Nice! Yes! Awesome! Yes! And Sekiro didn't even really have builds. Your only option was to learn every single attack pattern.
So that's a weird thing to say. First off, it's true that Sekiro does not have builds in the same sense as Dark Souls or Elden Ring, but it does have several different ways of playing. The Shinobi prosthetic lets you experiment with tools that you collect, and the ability tree can give you new moves that alter how you approach encounters. I don't see this as all that far removed from the concept of builds in other Souls games. Also, when you say that your only option is to learn every enemy's attack pattern, doesn't that apply to all of the Souls games? Having a build doesn't mean that you don't have to learn an attack pattern. It just means that you have to invest in a style, and Sekiro is not too different in that respect.
Foolish samurai, this action game is actually a concealed rhythm game.
Well, that's pretty reductive. While you do get into a rhythm of parrying enemy attacks to build up the posture bars, Sekiro has a lot more going on than that. I know he's trying to make a joke with this, but Sekiro has some of the best FromSoft combat, and after what he said about builds and boss patterns, I'm a little annoyed that he's putting it down like this to try and raise up Shadow of the fucking Erdtree.
So what happened? What changed?
FromSoft got shit at making bosses and encounters, but that's just my theory.
Well, you see, you could honestly blame the entire discourse on this one single dookie-looking pine cone, a Scadu fragment.
There is a hell of a lot more to the discourse than the fragments. My biggest issue is the copy-pasted assets. Unironically, I think there are more enemies from the base game than there are new ones. In past FromSoft DLC, there was at most 5 copy-pasted enemies, and I am sure that you could pull many other issues from videos or forums or whatever. The fragments are just one more problem in a list with this DLC.
Or as Miyazaki would like to gaslight you into calling a Scadutree Fragment. Alright, sure, dude, alright, whatever you say. Now, get back in your Gyal cell.
Yeah, okay, I like that joke.
These little things are how you level up your character in the land of shadow, and some folks are pissed.
What he briefly showed here in low opacity was the Steam page that read mixed. Now, I've read a fair number of the reviews on Steam, and when it first came out, it had more to do with technical issues. Reading it now, however, you get a lot of gameplay critiques, and they go beyond just too difficult. You can get info on stuff I've already gone over briefly, but weirdly I didn't find any comments on the fragment, so maybe people did ignore them like Circletoons said. But I don't believe that.
Surely it can't be that straightforward, can it? This little spiky thing couldn't have obliterated 15 years of white-knuckled hardcore classics that everyone adored for their sheer difficulty.
So I try not to think of Souls games as difficult as much as I think of them as fair and engaging challenges. Most of the games can be pretty easy once you know what you're doing. You just have to get past the bullshit platforming. The only one that I adore would be Dark Souls 1, and it has a lot more to do with the overall experience rather than just sheer difficulty. Also, Shadow of the Erdtree creates problems going forward. The only effect that it has on the previous games is that it makes me appreciate them more. Except Dark Souls 2. Fuck that game.
Well, just like how America shattered the Elden Ring, I believe the argument has been fragmented into multiple pieces. So let's take some putrid online gamer debates and shatter them into some consumable chunks in what I believe to be the source of the problem.
Why are you using putrid gamer debates? Why not use well-reasoned ones? Surely you could find some worthwhile arguments against the DLC.
Because I feel it's actually shockingly interesting given the unique space these games are in. So, let's just break this thing, I guess.
These are the great argument shards, and to wield the full might of a gamer's opinion...
Why again with the denigrating of gamers with the Milady meme? It's just weird to me to put forward this perspective that gamers are fedora-tipping cocoon havers. The majority of gamers don't play MMOs.
We must consume them!
Oh, that was the wrong one! There are people in your walls trying to steal your data!
Oh, it's an ad. That's fine. I will give him props, however, for having it listed in the chapters.
Now, as any Dark Blood Sekiro Ring Souls player will tell you, Elden Ring is FromSoft's easiest game.
I don't believe every player would say that, and I wouldn't even say it myself. Out of all of them, I had the easiest time with Demon Souls, because Moongrass is everywhere in that game, and I find the majority of the games easier than the freaking Haligtree area. My most played of the games are Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring. I would easily call Elden Ring the harder of the two. It would be nice to get a source on your definitive statements once in a while.
By, like, magnitudes. Almost every build is viable and has room for cheese.
How could the same not be said for the prior games? We're not gonna get an answer, are we?
Summons and horse combat can belittle enemy encounters.
I would go further and say that the ashes straight up break the game. With Mimic Tier especially, you can get it to where you don't even have to fight most bosses. And horse combat is just dull.
The open world really invites you to overlevel and over-equip. Crafting allows you to always have that specific status effect you need, and there are checkpoints everywhere, including special ones at boss doors.
All of that is true, and my theory for why that is that Elden Ring's gameplay is at odds with the open world design. You run around grabbing all the loose crafting materials, building up levels, and do not get me started on the checkpoints, holy crap. Of course, they overcompensate by scaling up everything in the late game. The more constrained level design of prior games makes it easier to balance stuff like this. And you can even have a discussion about Sekiro's boss memories in relation to Scadutree Fragments, because they are somewhat similar, but again, Sekiro doesn't have the world design of Elden Ring or its DLC, so it's easier to account for a player's level.
Ah, kids these days would never survive a Dark Souls run back.
It's funny that you use this one because it's one of the shittier gauntlets in the series. It is spammed to the fucking brim with poorly designed enemies, and they add even more on New Game Plus. Jesus, that run. But instead of improving encounter design, FromSoft have opted to have simplistic encounters with a checkpoint every 0 to 5 enemies. And that's not even hyperbole.
Or the fucking Dark Souls 2 Death Door! Fuck this thing! Jesus Christ! However, the initial hours of Elden Ring can be quite challenging, particularly if you're new to Souls games.
I don't think this is true at all discounting the main bosses. The early areas are trivial, so much so that I don't even need to level a weapon until I hit Leyendell Royal Capital. And I think most people would find entering a new genre of any game to be challenging at first. Like most games, it's a matter of learning the mechanics, and Elden Ring bombards you with tutorial boxes early on. The halcyon days of Undead Asylum.
And I think a lot of people forgot that. Towards the middle to late game, things can get comically easy.
Middle game, sure. but Far Missoula and everything in and beyond the consecrated snowfield are scaled up. Comically, in some cases. I might give you Ashen Capital, though.
Especially if you're running a level 200 Tarnish turned Elden Blord.
I don't think I have ever made it over 170 in the base game. And that was after going into every cave, beating all bosses, and using all of the rune containers I found. I'm sure it's possible, but you would have to do some serious farming for 200.
Players returning after a break might find the sudden shift from effortlessly defeating enemies and tanking multiple hits to struggling for survival quite jarring. This can feel like an unnecessary spike in difficulty, especially if you're unaware that the DLC significantly scales down the character's overall power level.
For me, the opening of the DLC was pretty easy. I beat the dancing line on my second attempt with no fragment upgrades. And on my second playthrough, I was able to run past almost everything in the open world with minimal effort. The most jarring part was the overinflated damage and health pool of the later bosses. And I'm not sure that scaling down the player's level is the right way to phrase this. What it literally does is scale up the enemies. I don't think it touches the player's power per se. It's not a big deal, I just thought it was confusing wording.
Which brings me to my next shard. So it doesn't matter if your character was level 713 and killed every god under the piss tree. In the Land of Shadow,
He's a little fucking bitch.
the DLC crunches your level down to prevent players from easily overpowering the content.
Again, no, that's not what it does. It scales up the enemies. You're just kind of making this confusing. And you might think that this is a distinction without a difference, but you don't want people thinking that FromSoft have somehow sneakily lowered your player level without any indication.
This approach actually enhances the experience because the satisfaction for most players comes from the challenge of defeating a boss after multiple attempts.
I don't think it's quite as simple as that. The satisfaction comes more so from learning the boss's moves such that you can outmaneuver them and get consistent hits. And a big part of that is having the boss be fun to fight in the first place. I've beaten the Golden Hippo 3 times now, and I'm never satisfied. Just pissed off at how shit of a fight it is. Having the game be harder or easier doesn't enhance much when the experience is piss.
I don't think anyone would like a $40 DLC from FromSoft filled with bosses that your late game build would just nuke in one hit.
Yeah, good thing no one has ever argued for that dumb thing you said.
So what? Is my character just screwed now? Can I offer you a nice pine cone in this trying time?
Scadutree Fragments are the way you counteract this nerfing effect. The more you get, the stronger you are here. It's that simple.
There are a couple of important things to note about this table. First off, there is a maximum of 20 levels, which leave you at just a little over double damage dealt and just a little under half damage received. Secondly, there are no more fragments beyond what you need to get to max level, which means that if you want the max benefit, you are going to have to run around and find every last one. I have only made it as high as level 19 with a map, and I still thought Radon did too much damage, and that's despite his awful moveset. Something that the base game did was that it had more upgrades for your flask than you could actually use. This way, players could reach max flask without having to scour the whole map. It's kind of odd to me that the DLC didn't repeat this, especially since they max out the fragment level as well. Also, it has the same effect as the base game when it comes to leveling. If you just go around exploring everything, you can become overleveled for earlier bosses. Again, I put this on the open world design. And since he's using the Fextra Life table here, I feel like mentioning that you can find a lot of comments on that page that explain their frustration with this system. Of course, it is Fextra Life, so you have to sift through some cringe, but there you go.
You'll find them everywhere, in dungeons, caves, fields, and even the stomachs of giant hippos. So the idea is that the more you organically explore, the stronger you'll organically get. Ow!
Or alternatively, you could look up the wiki map so you don't waste time searching for power where there is none. That's the nice thing about the soul/rune leveling system. If you don't want to explore all of the repetitive tombs, caves, and jails, you can just farm something until you reach the level you want. The fragments, on the other hand, only drop once, and there are a limited number of them. So if you're at level 19 and a boss is taking half your health bar with one attack, you're kind of just screwed. And I've already mentioned it, but Sekiro's boss memories can power you up for the next area, meaning that seeking out bosses is your key to future success, instead of seeking out some nigga with a pot.
Elden Ring, from base to DLC, gives you every resource and playstyle to make the game as hard or as easy as you want.
So I've heard of builds that let you one-shot bosses in this game, and of course there are the crazies that do Soul Level 1 playthroughs. But as we have already somewhat been over, difficulty is not the issue as much as the design of these systems. I don't want to use Spirit Ashes if I can help it because of how they cripple boss encounters. But I also don't want to fight this charge spamming twat anymore. I think if you sat down with most people and asked them what they meant by something being too difficult, you would eventually get them to break it down into specific mechanics, rather than just raw damage numbers. Although damage can also be an issue in and of itself.
But you have to learn them and use them. Call it a byproduct from complacency in the gameplay, or choice paralysis from how many options Elden Ring truly gives you, but I really think that most players here, especially the ones complaining about difficulty, aren't using every tool at their disposal.
I'm certainly not, but like I said, I don't want to use Spirit Ashes because they can make it disappointingly easy. But also, like I've said, most of the bosses in this DLC aren't fun to fight.
Listen, I play like a brain-dead, unoptimized moron. And for a while, I barely understood the idea of level soft caps and hard caps, faith buffs, crit daggers, elemental weaknesses. What the fuck do you mean I gotta eat this dude's meat?
Oh, you must be hungry.
Am I?
Yes, you can do one-shot methods, and you can find ways to mitigate lots of damage. But a shitty boss is still a shitty boss.
And other than the final bastard, I killed nearly every single boss in 1 to 5 tries by just swinging a fucking big-ass stick until the scary thing got turned into dust particles.
I don't believe you. You say you play like an unoptimized brain-dead moron, but you beat nearly all bosses with a stick in 1 to 5 tries? Get out of here. No, you didn't.
And I did it all before any balance changes.
Oh my goodness, you seem quite upset by this. But look on the bright side. Now you can beat Radahn in 1 to 3 tries with a pencil.
So if my barely functioning bonk brain can do it, so can anyone else. I watched a buddy use like 8 buffs and consume a pile of God knows what and beat the final boss without moving or taking damage, decimating him with every hit and healing to full health infinitely.
Sounds like quite the engaging experience.
Genuinely felt like I was watching an exploit, but it wasn't an exploit. He was just using every tool within reach. Elden Ring's combat is 50% get good and 50% puzzle.
Well, those don't sound mutually exclusive at all. And you know there are different types of puzzles, right? You have dodge the sword swing, and you have dodge the particle effects to try and find the sword swing. Also, this is not a good clip to show when saying get good. This poor fellow, General Sam, is hit by nothing in this clip. I think Mesmer is one of the better bosses in the DLC, and even he has bullshit. Also, yes, I can see that you subbed and liked. Your magnanimity is noted. I wonder if Sam ignored the Scadutree Fragments.
What works, what doesn't work, try new summons, respec, craft greases, swap talisman, throw a goddamn pot of molten glunch at their goddamn face. If they're spamming a move that always kills you, you're spamming a mistake.
I like how you showed Melania's retarded waterfowl dance when saying that. The problem with that move is I can't even tell where the attack is. She has an orb of sword slashes and she flies around your head doing insane amounts of damage. It's fucking skunk piss and you know it. We all know it. And the fact that I can't tell what's happening visually makes it really frustrating to figure out what my mistake even is. It makes it so I have to spam mistakes to even find the correct action. And it's the same for Bale, it's the same for the Dancing Lion, it's the same for Commander Charge Spam, and it's the same for Radahn's eye-raping second phase. It didn't used to be like this. There was a point in Souls games where I could see an enemy swing and correctly intuit what my response should be. And now I can't even see, let alone guess what's going to happen next.
For God's sakes, I've seen people beat these bosses on a dance pad! A fucking goldfish has beat some of these freaks! Are you saying you are less than a fish in a tank?
Okay, so as for the first part, pointing out that someone is really good at a game doesn't mean anything to me. I've watched Ongbul no-hit run these bosses, but I don't consider that to be something even above average players can do. You have to be exceptional when it comes to these specific challenges. It's not in any way indicative of difficulty to say that this random person is really, really good. And now we have to talk about this goldfish. I went and watched the video for full context, and to say that this fish beat a boss is a gross oversimplification, and borderline dishonest. Come on, RT, he doesn't mean that the fish literally picks up a controller and we'll get there. So what happens is that the fish swims around the tank and triggers different controls. This changes throughout the video, presumably to accommodate different builds or the fish's behaviors for the day. Whatever, it's not that important. All you need to know is that it's pretty much random. So to compensate, the character is set to max level. And I couldn't find this in the video, but I presume it's at max Scadutree level as well. It probably has a number of spell buffs too. All of this is fair, considering it's a fish, but Circletoons doesn't mention this, which at best is disingenuous. You can't honestly say that the fish and the average player are on equal footing here. And just so we have the argument again,
A fucking goldfish has beat some of these freaks! Are you saying you are less than a fish in a tank?
if you gave the same parameters to someone who had never touched a video game, I have no doubt that they would do better than the fish. This argument is retarded. Also, now I have another generic cringe streamer in my recommended for the next month, so thanks for that, dick.
The DLC has about 50 hours of content if you frolic around everywhere and poke every ghoul with a ghoul poker.
Stop it!
You know what else has dozens of hours of content? Any Ubisoft open world game. Maybe we should do a contest to see which game has more reused content, Shadow of the Erdtree or Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It would be closer than you'd think.
But it seems like a lot of people don't want to play like this, they want to play like this, and that's totally valid, but it's going to be objectively harder, so don't be shocked when the open world game crushes your bones for playing it like a more linear experience.
Most Souls players would not be shocked to find that to be the case. Anytime you go straight for the main bosses, you're going to find yourself at a lower level. What I found most shocking was how much the DLC wasted my time with reused enemies and bosses, and repetitive crypts and caves, and laughably frequent ambushes. That was the primary reason I stopped exploring on my own and just pulled up a map. I got the fragments and went for the bosses. Shit as most of them were.
If you rush the DLC, the bosses are going to be the ones rushing your ass down to the fog wall.
Poor bastard just walked in with a level 3 scud.
Help! So, with all the fragments in our inventory, what's my final opinion on this debacle, and is there a solution that would please everyone?
They could have designed the bosses better. But more realistically, I would change the lock-on points of some of the bosses so the camera doesn't get pushed into walls and floors. Cut back on the particle effects. You could always add more fragments around the world too. And what I mean by that is make the bosses drop them or something. Don't make me go around looking for them again. Some people might say to have the fragments buffed, but I would suggest balancing things better or maybe having a higher spectrum of levels. Just please don't make me scour the shitty world to find them.
For starters, I really think the DLC, isn't hard, and I'm not posturing to some Elden Ring stan Miyazaki shrine. I'm saying from a technical level, and from what I've been able to achieve as a B-tier Souls player, it really isn't hard if you just explore a little and use every tool you got.
So, in terms of the open world, I would absolutely agree. But this is because the encounters are mostly trivial, and you can find checkpoints behind every patrol. The dungeon bosses are also a cakewalk. I only had difficulty at low fragment levels, and even then it wasn't much. And the NPC bosses are boring cringe, like all NPC fights. Stop putting them in games. As for the main bosses, the most difficulty I had was with Commander Bumrush, Bale, and Radahn, and this is because of their inflated health bars combined with insane damage even at higher fragment levels. And pretty shit movesets. And speaking of using the tools at my disposal, the only way I beat them was by summoning my Mimic tier and no other tool. Except for Radahn where I used the Rune Arc. And I did it more so to skip the bosses rather than deal with their nonsense. And frankly, I don't like doing it. The bosses can't handle 2 targets at once, and while I'm sure you can break the game with other tools, I find that learning a boss's moveset and countering it is much more satisfying. Assuming it doesn't have a move where it teleports, explodes, and takes 80% of my health in the process.
Now, could the scadu system be explained more thoroughly? Yeah. Should they have made a bunch of redundant scud fragments so you didn't have to comb through everything? Probably. And are the fragments a bad system? Absolutely not.
I mean, sure, the system can work. Like I said, Sekiro did something similar, but balanced it better, and also made collecting them less tedious.
The 2 routes I see this near sequel-sized DLC could have gone down are...
Sequel size compared to what? Elden Ring? The base game has far more in terms of everything. The DLC didn't even have an underground section, unless you count that one area off the south coast, and you shouldn't. And the DLC may have a lot of space, but a lot of it is empty and not used very well. You want to fight 100 rats in the Frenzy Forest? How about several dozen flymen on the cliffs near Darklight Catacombs? Or maybe you want to go to the Finger Ruins and hang out with the loving, helping, sucking, motherfucking, eating, goddamn teleporting snake. Fuck.
Make it too easy, not add any sort of power negation, and have late game characters walk through every encounter in 5 hours, or whack every character with a shrinkening hammer so that the experience can be tailored specifically to the developer's preferences, allowing for a more customized and curated environment.
Well, really, both of those things happened. As we've gone over, most of the DLC is too easy, but this is less to do with character level and more to do with shit encounter design combined with frequent checkpoints. And even at fragment level 19, I am still taking 1500 health damage from a move I had no way of knowing was coming, so the dev's preferred Taylor experience is not so great overall.
Which way, Miyazaki?
The ghoul cave or the poison swamp? No, stop. Why are you so excited? Stop. Obviously, they went with the latter, and I think it was the right decision. And let's be honest, Elden Ring is FromSoft's first game that kinda left their core audience, and historically, their main vocal fans have been those who relish extreme challenges.
I don't know if the first part of that is true. Elden Ring could easily be considered Dark Souls 4 in a sense. As far as I know, most longtime Souls players were happy with it, and the most vocal fans say a lot of things. I can only speak for myself here, and I value Dark Souls 1 and 3 for a lot more than just the extreme challenge.
But when a game sells 25 million copies, shit can get weird and really fucking loud.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, most people love Elden Ring and the DLC. The Steam reviews are mixed, sure, but the biggest names out there will tell you that it's excellent.
Miyazaki, in a recent interview with The Guardian, stated, quote, "In preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring, and I wanted to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games, so my approach or playstyle was to use everything I have at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also all the knowledge that I have as the architect of the game."
Oh god, is Miyazaki using spirit ashes when he designs bosses?
Freedom and open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowered the barrier to entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else. So collect the fucking pine cones, eat the fucking glunch, kill the fucking bosses!
Well, that would certainly make the game easier. It wouldn't make it better though. We're at the point where I couldn't tell you what a boss's movements mean for their attacks. That is, if I can even see their movements. I can run past most of the enemies in the game because of all the space in the straightforward level design. And I barely know the first thing about what happened in this story. And even if I did, I doubt very much that I would find it meaningful. The reason I like Dark Souls 1 so much is because most of the bosses move in ways that help me learn their attacks instead of having to dodge randomly. The encounters challenge me in unique ways, and if I want to run past them, I have to plan ahead quite a bit. And the decaying world with its complementary mechanics and characters gives me a lot to ponder. It's not just a matter of difficulty. The games used to be better.
To be fresh is to be unpopular. To be exciting is to be unconventional. To be bold is to be risky, and to be creative is to be misunderstood.
What the hell are you talking about? What is this vacuous nonsense you use to capture video? Okay, let's take this one at a time. To be fresh is to be unpopular. This is not at all true, especially when it comes to gaming. You can go back decades and find stuff like Pac-Man, Mortal Kombat, Doom, Halo, and Resident Evil 4. You can even go more recent with stuff like Doom 4, God of War 4, and Helldivers 2. All of this stuff was a pretty fresh experience when it came out, and none of it was lacking in popularity. As far as the DLC goes, it doesn't look all that unpopular from what I've seen, although I personally find it more stinky than fresh. To be exciting is to be unconventional. For this, my mind just goes to Marvel movies. They are pretty conventional by this point. You usually know what you're going to get, and people still find them exciting. Or maybe that was more so the case 5 years ago. Nowadays, And as for myself, I don't find this DLC to be particularly exciting or unconventional. It's just more of Elden Ring and its problems. To be bold is to be risky. These are probably the closest on the list, but they still don't go hand in hand. I guess it was pretty bold of FromSoft to copy and paste enemies from the base game all over the DLC, but it wasn't exactly risky with a game as popular as Elden Ring. To be creative is to be misunderstood. I would hope that when creating games and movies that the people involved would share a mutual understanding of one another, so that they can synergize without having to explain themselves too much. And if you are going from the angle of a consumer not understanding the creation, then it's on a really big spectrum. As for Shadow of the Erdtree, I feel like I understand at least half of it, but I cannot for the life of me understand why they thought it was a good idea to make Radahn teleport into an explosion that deals nearly 1500 damage at level 19 fragment. I don't even need to mention the damage. Why the fuck would you have a move like this? How am I in any way supposed to see this coming?
A game for everyone is a game for no one.
What does that mean? So apparently this was something said by one of the Helldivers 2 devs some months back. And I couldn't find more context on what they meant either. It just sounds like oxymoronic fluff to me, and no one is asking you to make the game for everyone. They just don't want to be bombarded with particle effects, extended combos, reused bosses, shitty lock-on points. You get the idea. It's not about making the game for everyone. It never was. As much as I praise Dark Souls 1, that game has problems, but it doesn't waste my time anywhere near as much as Shadow of the Erdtree. Neither myself or any other gamer is asking to have our favorite games appeal to the majority of people, let alone everyone. You can make the majority of people happy by having your game optimized properly. and most gamers are quick to realize if a genre is not for them. Simply put, I think Circletoons is feigning a grand point with all of these buzz phrases. The whole video could be summed up as him whinging about people complaining about difficulty, when there is a lot more substance to the issues. Now, I don't want people thinking I dislike his channel. His animations are creative and I often find them funny, but the arguments in this video are ass, and don't even begin to address the problems people have with the DLC. Scadutree Fragments are not the sole cause of people's frustration. As I've already said, my biggest issue was the copy-pasting everywhere, but it's far from my only complaint. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now. Maybe I'll say more on this DLC in the future, who knows. But for now, thanks for your time, and I'll see you when I feel like it.